This is a review of Teaching with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. This book's purpose is to serve as an analysis and a guide to teachers to understanding poverty and its effects on their students, the parents of their students, and how it manifests in their classroom. He also, in this book, creates an action plan for students, for teachers and administrators to better serve their students in these schools. In each chapter, he discusses it through the eyes of a teacher who is on the verge of retirement and is looking forward to this retirement because of how hard his teaching life has become. My review will take place in two parts. First of all, we will discuss poverty and its effects. Then we will dive into what we can do to help our students and then help ourselves in turn. We'll discuss little snippets of classroom management as we go through. So first of all, we need to define what is poverty so that we can understand where our students are coming from. I really liked Eric Jensen's definition of poverty in this book because he says it's a chronic and debilitating condition that results from multiple adverse synergistic risk factors and affects the mind, body, and soul. This last bit was huge because we often look at poverty as just people not having enough to make ends meet, not having enough to eat, not having enough to live life to its fullest. But poverty is it's a very complex phenomenon, and it's an all-encompassing thing. It encompasses their entire lives, and it creates many hurdles that these kids have to jump through. In this book, Jensen speaks about Title I schools, and Title I schools are actually schools that are defined by the government in which 50% or more of the population of students are qualified for free or reduced lunch. And I don't know if you all know this, but all 43 of Birmingham City schools are actually classified as Title I. So this hits very close to home, and that's just Birmingham City schools. It's not counting the rest of Jefferson County. So how does poverty affect kids? First and foremost, these kids are often malnourished because vegetables and fruits and healthy meals are often more costly to provide than fast food. Their parents just simply might not have time to provide this for them. They might have minor or no access to healthcare services. Their means of transportation are pretty low or difficult. They face abuse at times, and this is important to note because in girls, especially in the classroom, they might often have mood swings, and you need to learn to not take this personally and to just sit down with your student to understand why they are causing this disruption in your class. These students come from poor neighborhoods that are dangerous. They often live in old houses that might have neurotoxins that are affecting their cognition on a daily basis. Their poor neighborhoods might lack resources like a good library, good after-school programs, or simply just greenery and park spaces where these kids can go and socially engage with other children and other people. This can cause them to eventually develop psychiatric disturbances. These kids are more likely to exhibit depressive symptoms. They have maladaptive social functioning. So how can this all manifest in the classroom? Well, first of all, we have a couple of general factors. Many of these students might come from single-parent households, and students that come from these single-parent households on average have lower attendance rates than students that come from two-parent households. Lower attendance typically means lower grades and lower college acceptance. Children from lower socioeconomic statuses often have decreased health, like we mentioned before, because they aren't afforded the health care they need, and this causes them to be sick often and causes lower attendance. To add to all this, you now have emotional factors that manifest in your classroom. First and foremost, many of these kids' parents tend to be authoritarian, and the last thing that you want to do is to bring that authoritative attitude into your classroom. You want that student to feel like it's a safe space for them. You don't want them to feel like they need to avoid it. Their parents often have harsh disciplinary methods, so you need to steer away from that. Have them take part in what decisions need to be made for the class. These kids have emotional dysregulation. This causes them to prematurely give up on tasks that you honestly might feel like they can complete, but their confidence just quickly goes down and they aren't able to complete those tasks. And lastly, these kids just really want to build reliable relationships. And that leads me to my next point. Now that we've discussed what poverty is and how it will manifest in your classroom, we're going to talk about these little steps that you can take that will make a huge difference for your classroom management. And they might seem like really minor changes, but honestly, these minor changes will cause ripple effects. And even Jensen discusses this, that his methods seem like they might not work to most people, but they truly do. So we have to see the importance of them. First and foremost, as we were talking about relationships, your student-teacher relationship is the first thing that you need to establish. It must be a positive relationship. You must embody respect even if you're not getting it back. You eventually will, but you have to constantly embody respect. Give these kids a feel that they have a voice. They have a say in what happens in your classroom. So share the decision making. And last but not least, create an inclusive environment. Speak as it is your class, our class, using language and vocabulary like our. And this makes a huge difference because it puts you in the picture with these students. Now, these students are under great deals of stress. I want you to just take a moment and think back to when you were in high school or middle school. Think about everything that you had to deal with as you were changing, as newer things were being introduced to you, as you were being told that you need to start being serious, you need to start thinking about college, and the peer pressure that was around you. You just wanted to fit in, you wanted to have friends. Now add to that the stress of being impoverished, the stress of maybe not knowing where your next meal will come from, or waiting to come to school so that you can eat. These kids have to deal with so much more than we can imagine. And they come from other stressors at home as well. It might be abuse. It might be having to deal with not having really parents available at home that you can seek guidance from. And they're pretty young. They probably don't know how to manage this stress. They might have no coping mechanisms or bad coping mechanisms. And this continued stress can induce changes in their brain and affect their cognition. And you need to see these signs in your classroom. It can cause decreased attention and concentration. These kids might not be able to stay on one task for a long time. They might not be able to read long passages. They might be absent a lot. They might have no motivation, or they might have just no social skills, no desire to engage socially. But how can you help your students and then in turn help yourself? First of all, environment is everything. Like we said, you need to first establish that positive student-teacher relationship. Then you need to establish an environment where the student feels safe. You need to help them mitigate stress. Decrease your homework load. Sometimes these students might have after-school jobs so they can help their parents. They might not be able to go home right away. They might have to go with a parent to work until that parent can take them home. So just keep that in mind. Maybe incorporate homework time during your class. These little steps show students that you're taking initiative to help them in their daily matters. Help them blow off steam, teach them small exercises they can do. Sometimes these kids are dealing with anxiety. It might exacerbate their testing anxiety. So find ways to assess them maybe without using tests, or teach them how to manage stress when it comes to tests. Incorporate kinesthetic arts and encourage their use for creativity, because that's actually a coping mechanism and it can really help them feel more positive in your classroom. And last but not least, the type of instruction. These students might not always respond to didactic lecture. They might be more disruptive during lecture. They might just want to interrupt because they can't really learn that way. They can't just memorize from you speaking. So maybe look into inquiry-based learning, the 5E method, or just discovery-based learning, things that they can use their hands. It can be more of a discovery process, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. And your expectations. So I learned this during my student teaching experience. My cooperating teacher constantly told me, Rua, you need to keep your expectations high for these students. Even from class to class, even if it feels like their abilities are different, you need to keep your expectations high for everybody and support them throughout all this time, because high expectations leads to hope and learned optimism. And students that are impoverished often are used to hopelessness, which leads to learned helplessness. And this can manifest as early as first grade, as Eric Jensen mentions. So you need to help reverse that process. You need to teach them that, no, you are capable. I believe in you. So by believing in them, teach them to believe in themselves. Now back to engaging the students with your teaching. So in impoverished schools, about 1/5 of the teacher's time is spent on discipline. But engaged kids can keep themselves out of trouble because they're busy using their minds and not trying to um, cause issues, not trying to entertain themselves in other ways. They're entertained because their mind is working. So employ things like inquiry-based learning, discovery-based learning, 5E method. You don't have to follow these strictly, but just understand the premise of how they work. I encourage all of you to look into them if you already haven't, and just see what you can incorporate in your class. See how you can learn to engage students at the beginning of class and keep them just really interested in what we're going to do during class today. Because oftentimes they're victims of inattention in their own home. So help make it a positive social learning environment by engaging them, by using group activities and debates. Help them find ways in which they can find their own capabilities, they can know what they're good at, and they can feel more confident. You need to just start building their confidence for them. And more about being behind your students' success. If you take anything away from this book, I really think it should be this statement. It says, ensure that every student feels successful before he or she leaves for the day. This statement by Eric Jensen really hit me hard, because if you make sure that every student is leaving your class every day feeling successful, you are ensuring that when they come back, they will feel better about being in your class. It will be a more positive environment. End class maybe with a review that helps like bring together ideas from previous weeks. And he gives a couple of examples of what you can do to just help students feel like they're really accomplishing something in your class, and it will do wonders. And he also talks about using energizers, especially if it's a morning class or an evening class. Get your students up, get them moving. Have them do things that are a little bit more lighthearted. Being lighthearted never hurt anybody. So teach them that there is space to be lighthearted in your classroom, because it helps build that positive relationship between you and your students. And honestly, they just want somebody that does understand them. So try to appeal to them from that aspect. And I hope this was helpful. I hope that you all found some helpful ideas in it. Honestly, the main takeaway from this is that discipline shouldn't just be punishment. It shouldn't just be consequences for being bad. Learning how to manage a classroom means setting up an environment where you don't have to use discipline. You don't have to constantly keep correcting students on their behavior. It's about creating that environment where everybody understands that you're there for their success and you just sincerely want to help them be better. And that happens with you creating that positive classroom culture, by you creating that good relationship between you and them, showing them that you're truly there for them, showing them that you can help them cope with stress in many ways, showing them that you can be there for them if they need to speak about how things are going at home, if they need to talk to you about why they couldn't complete a specific assignment because of what was going on at home. Just create that environment where they're able to confide in you. They are able to feel like you aren't there just to punish them if they don't finish an assignment, that you're more than just that person that's writing their grade on a grade book. And last but not least, it's all in the little things. These might seem like very minor changes that you might make to your classroom, but believe me, they will have long-lasting effects on your students. Thank you.